Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the third and the final IBBI webinar on reporting on IBBI guidelines, a guided approach. We had the first on 24th February, the second on 15th March, and today we are having our final. During the webinar, we'll be looking at the declaration points and related indicators and also talk about few examples to help you understand what needs to be reported. Few indicators are very straightforward and few could be interpreted differently. Hence, to clear out the confusion, we have provided you with indicators and also an interpretation from our side so that all businesses stand on the common platform. Please ask your doubts in the end to help us reply better and also so that the flow of the webinar is not broken. IBBI is about to complete its 2 years on 22nd May 2016, and companies who have signed the declaration when IBBI was launched on 22nd May 2014 are required to report on the 10 declaration points. Few companies have signed around September 2014, and hence the report completion would be due around the 1st September 2016. Others, all the companies would have to submit the report to the Secretariat by 22nd April 2016. Sorry. All companies who have completed their 2 years are required to provide a report on progress made on the 10-point declaration. As this is for the first time IBBI companies would be reporting, hence indicators were developed to ease the reporting. The indicators were developed by the working group consisting of IBBI members. In total, 18 indicators were developed, out of which 5 indicators were made core level indicators or bare minimum disclosure on action taken on declaration. Comprehensive level includes a holistic view with disclosure on all 18 indicators as per IBBI declaration. All companies are expected to report on at least the core level. The core level indicators are 1.1, 2.1, 4.1, 6.1, and 9.1. We would be looking at each declaration and the linked indicators in details in the coming slides. Companies may choose to report on core level and few other indicators as well. Indicator 1.1, which comes under the declaration point 1, that is mapping biodiversity interfaces with business operation. The indicator hence subtitled as production sites that have been screened with regard to relevance of potential impacts and dependencies on biodiversity and ecosystem services. In this indicator, the company is required to disclose on preliminary screening done on project sites by companies. Screening to identify the biodiversity impacts and dependencies that are most important for a project site. The disclosure can be done on number of sites where such screening has been conducted. The particulars shall include the location of such sites, production capacity, number of employees, approach or tools used to screen the sites for its impacts and dependencies on biodiversity. Here we have also provided examples of the tools that can be used to do such kind of assessment, such as EIA, which most companies usually do before we start the project, and also when the project is going for any renovation or retrofitting. We have the biodiversity assessment or biodiversity action plans. Then we have the digital observatory for protected areas. This though only gives you the idea about the protected areas nearby your project location. Then there is integrated biodiversity assessment tool, as well as the IBBI quick scan and IBBI baseline assessment, which also provides you the complete assessment of your project sites as well as your supply chain. The indicator 1.2, which moves from the operation focus screening to the value chain screening. To minimize risk, a life cycle analysis of biodiversity impact or dependencies through supply chain is supposed to be screened. Few tools which we do the same are listed in the slide, such as quick scan, the IBBI baseline assessment. There is tabs, which is called the toolkit for assessment of biodiversity in supply chain. And there are some checklists which can also be looked by the company, such as a guide for practical implementation. The next core indicator is 2.1, which comes under the declaration point 2, which is enhancing awareness on biodiversity within the organization. and the title of the indicator is number of trained employees on biodiversity and ecosystem services. The company is required to share details of person and also the level of the person who has undergone any form of training on biodiversity and ecosystem services management. There are different levels of training and types of training. Some trainings are there which focuses only on conservation, and there are some which focuses on the business linkages with the biodiversity. Companies are required to disclose the details of the training as well to make it clear the type of the training undergone by the employees. Here we also have listed out some established trainings on linking business and biodiversity is such as WBCSD Business Ecosystem Training, which is a self-training module on capacity building. Then the IBBI training on managing natural capital. Then there is the TEAB assessment, which is again a self-assessment. Further trainings on biodiversity alone is done by EDTRI certificate courses and leadership course in biodiversity conservation by BNHS. Indicator 2.2 is on the percentage of employees within organization who have been sensitized on biodiversity. Sensitization of employees could happen in many ways, such as having events on biodiversity, celebration of important days, or organizing workshops on biodiversity-related topics. The number of employees in the project unit are to be provided along with number of people sensitized on biodiversity. Company can disclose a number of employees based on their standard system of designating employees. Whether contract and part-time are included needs to be made clear while reporting. Indicator 2.3, which is on activities undertaken to create greater awareness on biodiversity among employees, is where the company is supposed to provide the type and the scope of the programs implemented and assistance provided to create greater awareness on biodiversity among employees. Here we have also shown few programs which helps in creating more awareness and also sensitizing the biodiversity and ecosystem services among employees, such as planting trees, nest box for birds nearby your project area, park cleanup activity, some workshops on biodiversity, some surveys on some extinct or rare or endangered species nearby your project. Indicator 3.1, assessment of impacts and dependencies, which comes under the leadership point of assessing biodiversity risk and opportunities. The company needs to describe impacts and dependencies on biodiversity and ecosystem services for sites that have undertaken an assessment. Impacts could be direct due to its operation or indirect through its supply chain. Dependencies refer to ecosystem services companies are dependent on directly or indirectly. Many companies directly interact with ecosystems such as agriculture, beverages, water services, forestry, electricity, oil, gas, mining, and tourism, as well as constructions companies. It's also relevant to sectors such as general, retail, healthcare, consulting, financial services, and others to a degree that the suppliers or customers interact directly with ecosystems. General retailers, for example, may face reputational or market risk if some of the suppliers are responsible for degrading ecosystems and the services they provide, as well as the financial institutes could face a problem of investing in less biodiversity friendly projects, which could also lead to piling of debt because of the non-function of the project due to biodiversity risks. One example on impact and dependency assessment is in 2008, Mondi, an international paper and packaging company, wanted to address the impacts that its plantation had on freshwater and biodiversity in the water scarce area of South Africa. And biodiversity and ecosystem services assessment helped Mondi contextualize many of the known drivers of the water scarcity in the region, such as the spread of invasive species, inefficient irrigation practices, climate change, and the increasing water demands of a developing nation. The assessment also expanded the water scarcity analysis beyond the scope of Mondi's existing environmental management systems, prompting new solutions and the establishment of comprehensive freshwater strategy, stretching from the plantations management to their community engagement through to Mondi's government relations. Indicator 3.2, which is on assessment of risk and opportunities with regard to biodiversity and ecosystem services, is a step that comes after the company has conducted the assessment of impacts and dependencies on ecosystem services. Here we have listed out the examples of risk and opportunities which company would come out and can address after the assessment of impact and dependencies has been conducted. We have out here created the risk part and also the opportunity that could come out of such kind of risk. For example, the first risk that we could look at is a physical risk. Now, under the physical risk, it is like increasing natural hazard cost. For example, more frequent or severe storm damage due to degradation of coastal ecosystems and loss of the natural protection role, which in a way impacts the project nearby such areas. Opportunity is reducing cost from investing in green infrastructure, example, protection against such natural hazards. The second risk that we'd look at is something related to legal and regulatory. The risk is such as increasing compliance cost, such as reduction of emissions and impacts, local impacts on the biodiversity. Opportunity is reducing compliance cost by using resources more efficiently and reducing waste. Also, managing the impacts on the local biodiversity. The third kind of risk that we look at, which is important to most industries, are the market or the product risk, such as the changing consumer values or preferences leads to reduced market share. For example, more organic products are now preferred by the customers worldwide. The opportunity is in emerging international markets and products may offer new revenue stream from the company owned or managed land. For example, carbon water or habitats credits. The final risk, the second final risk is the reputational risk, which is a risk to the reputation of a company due to their impacts on the biodiversity ecosystem services, which has not been addressed by the company. Similarly, opportunity is increasing access to resources as a partner of choice for the governments because of their biodiversity friendly work and their management and stakeholders, and increased market share of their products. Final risk, which we are looking at, is the financial risk, increasing financing cost. So some leading financing banks worldwide, such as the World Bank or the ADB, they usually invest on companies who has got less risk to such biodiversity, which also comes under their strict performance standard published by them. Similarly, the opportunity is that new or maintain investor confidence, and they're improving access to the finances globally and nationally. Another core indicator, which is the core indicator 4.1, which comes under the leadership declaration point of considering the impacts of businesses decision on biodiversity. The core indicator 4.1, which is organization-wide policy that addresses biodiversity and ecosystem services, requires the company to indicate whether the organization has specific biodiversity policy or policy is embedded in environment, HSE or sustainability policy. The company also needs to disclose whether the report or the policy will be publicly available. The indicator 5.1, which comes under the leadership declaration point of 5, setting objectives and targets for biodiversity management. The 5.1, which is strategy for biodiversity and ecosystem management, requires the company to report on any goals and targets that are established for biodiversity and ecosystem services management, such as the Lafarge Group has a requirement of getting all the sites near the protected area a biodiversity management plan, which is a target to be achieved. The indicator 5.2, which is the action plan to avoid, minimize, rehabilitate, and offset biodiversity impact, requires the company to indicate whether the company has any action plan to avoid, minimize, rehabilitate, or offset biodiversity impacts due to project. For example, the Rio Tinto QIT Madagascar mineral project shows how to have such action plan. Companies can write about such projects or action plan in this section. The example, which is shown below, shows that the assessment done by Rio Tinto has given them the list of impact that the company will be having on biodiversity. That is, the most important direct negative impact of mining activities on biodiversity would be the loss of 1665 hectare of the forest, that is 3.5% of the remaining forest nearby the area, through dredging, which involves clearing vegetation and removing soil. The habitat loss would be incremental as shown in the report, and with approximately 50 hectares being actively mined at any one time. So then Rio Tinto created their avoid plan, which was collectively covering an area of 624 hectare. These areas are now legally recognized protected areas and protect 27% of the best quality remaining forest cover on the ilmenite deposit area. That was the way to avoid. Then they tried to minimize their impacts by doing a diverse range of activities, such as the reduction of the likelihood or magnitude of biodiversity impact from the mining activities. Then they tried to rehabilitate whatever the impacts were left. And finally, they the part which could not be minimized, they took an offset for it, is investing in a biodiversity offset at other forest sites away from their project area, and in a way creating a net positive impact. I now pass the discussion on the other declaration points and indicators to my colleague, Praveer Deshmukh.
Good afternoon to all. Thanks, Arnav, for explaining our first 5 IBBI declaration points. And now we will understand about the remaining 5 declaration points. So first, our point number 6 is designating an individual within the organization as a biodiversity champion. So we're expecting under this 6.1 indicator is there, and which is a core indicator, and the member has to provide a name, title, and contact details of a designated biodiversity champion within the organizations. And if the company is interested, they can also go to the project level also. So there are many levels: organization level, project levels, and also on the site levels. So why this first question which comes under why this designated person is important in this section. So this person will act as a single point contacts for the company to understand the various biodiversity related issues within the organizations and also the site. The person can also if the person also having some understanding on the biodiversity, how biodiversity is linked to your business, and what is the business dependencies and impacts on the biodiversity, so he can provide some of the guidelines, some internal strategies to the management for if the company is going to enhance the project or maybe taking one or new projects in the similar area, so he can provide some technical background. And he will also involved in implementing some of the measurement management plans for the biodiversity management and its sustainable use. So this is 6.1. It's a core indicators, and under 6 this is only one indicator is there. So now we'll move to the IBBI declaration point number 7, which is including the applicable biodiversity aspect in the environment management system. This point is further elaborated in only one indicator, which is inclusion of biodiversity aspect in environment management system. The member needs to disclose how the biodiversity is integrated in environmental management systems of the company at various levels. We know most of the companies are following ISO 14001 for EMS systems, and integration of biodiversity related aspect in EMS systems will help us will help companies to implement the management plan, which is identified in previous points in the assessment of biodiversity impacts and dependencies. So they can integrate this major critical key important points in EMS, and they can implement during through this EMS systems. So first level of integration is integrating biodiversity and ecosystem services issues into EMS is to incorporate at a policy levels. Maybe company can go for a dedicated policy of a biodiversity, or they can integrate add some biodiversity elements in an environmental policy, and that too also on the organization level, on the top level, or also they can go for a unit level. The another example is integrating biodiversity related aspect in procurement policy, which is maybe a green procurement policy or any something new also, which will minimize the stress of impact of biodiversity in a supply chain level. And the examples of including biodiversity in supply chain is sourcing local sourcing of raw materials, sourcing some certified agriculture or forest produce, using some of the green transport area, and one more example is that sourcing, this is a specific example for the mining industries, that they can source some raw materials from a proper mines, which is issued an environmental clearance and having proper legal clearances and all this in a place, and they can take some raw material from them and then they can also showcase in their reports. So another example of integration is understanding the aspect impact analysis. So for example, if we take a mining industry, so they have a huge impact on the land use impact because of the land use change or the biodiversity. So this is a land use change is a primary impact, and this land use change also leads to some other impacts, which might be a secondary and tertiary impacts. Some of the examples are fragmentation of habitat for any wildlife species or any plant species, then loss of soil fertility, soil loss, and also loss of soil fertility. There might be a chances of increasing floods. So this aspect impact analysis will help in understanding the secondary and tertiary impacts of the project, and a business can avoid, minimize, and mitigate these impacts by proper planning. So the next point of IBBI declaration is encouraging relevant stakeholders to support better biodiversity management. So this point is further divided into three main sections. So first is activities undertaken with suppliers. The company can address this indicator by understanding the suppliers and their impacts and dependencies on biodiversity, and then implement action plan for minimizing their dependencies and impacts on the biodiversity ecosystem services through the capacity building, uh, using some certified raw materials and providing some legal legal issues to them, that why the company need to take an environmental clearance for that, maybe some consent to establish from CPCB and all these things. Then the second indicator is for the initiative, which are the initiatives taken for or with the customers and consumers. So providing product information to customers for its sustainable production and reduce biodiversity impacts is one of the examples. Another example is to provide the information to customers on how the company is reducing dependencies and impacts by implementing some of the biodiversity conservation measures or management plans to conserve the local biodiversity, and also how they are improving on the local biodiversity. So if they are already, if the company is already communicating on these parts, so they can add this specific information, which are the ways the company is communicating to the customers. They can use this data under this category. So the we'll move to the point number 3 under declaration number point 8, which is activities for or with other internal other internal or external stakeholders, if any. So the members are required to provide information on supports provided for conservation of biodiversity related aspect, which is also not their impacts, which is not related to company's impacts and dependency. It is totally a additional one, which is for internal or external stakeholders. And some of the examples are supported or partnering with any for conservation of any endangered species, like maybe a plant species or animal species. There are so many animal species which are tigers, dolphins, sharks, turtles, and all these things. And also support provided for management of any conservation areas. That's some of the companies are already providing some funds for the reserve forest, protected forest, and some natural resource and national parks for conservation of biodiversity. So they can provide these types of information under this point. Then we have point number 9. which is engaging in policy advocacy and dialogues with government, NGOs, academia on biodiversity concerns. So we divided this point in two main brackets. The first is engaging through various platforms. Examples are sharing best practices, and identifying some research partners. The members can provide the information of any engagement activities with policymakers, government. Uh, the members can share if they are presenting some of their best practices with any stakeholders or to the industry platform, that how they are integrating biodiversity in their own operations and which are the benefits they are getting after the integration of biodiversity or conservation of biodiversity. So they can showcase their best practices, or means they can provide data on the showcasing best practices in the various platforms under this indicator. Uh, the next point is second 9.2 point is participation in policy advocacy at international, national or local level. The members can provide information on any engagement activities with the policymakers, for example, government, or there are so many institutions, government institutions, they are also working on biodiversity conservations and all these things, or any regulatory bodies, local, this is also the local, regional, national level, and also the international level, could either directly or indirectly influencing biodiversity related policies within a state or country and where the companies operate. The members can describe any significant issues that are focused on your organization participation in policy advocacy internationally. For example, if the company is participating for a natural capital coalition to develop their tools and giving their suggestions for how this tool should be developed, and which are the concerns from the industries. So these types of work company can showcase under this point. So now we move to point number 10, which is initiating the valuation of relevant biodiversity and ecosystem services. So this is not a core indicator. The member can report on any valuation studies undertaken to evaluate the value of the biodiversity, maybe in the terms of monetary or non-monetary of their impacts on the biodiversity, which is also positive impacts and also the negative impacts, and the dependencies, which is also direct dependency or indirect dependencies for the biodiversity ecosystem services, and that too company can go for their own operations and also the value chains. The valuation will definitely help companies to understand the exact value of biodiversity and how the company is using that biodiversity value for human well-being and other for example for carbon sequestration, for reducing the temperature in that area. So these types of value they can understand from the biodiversity, and by understanding this value, the company may plan some corrective or avoidance actions to minimize further the impact on the biodiversity, and they can move to the net positive impact from the biodiversity. And some of the examples are assessment of biodiversity in a project site, that also biodiversity indexing will be a much better example for this, which is in biodiversity indexing, you will get a scientific data on the various types of biodiversity categories available in your project area, for example plants, animals, insects and all these things. And if you are continuously monitoring this thing, maybe for yearly monitoring, and if there is a number is increasing, then that means your biodiversity is growing, and your green belt or whatever the management plan you are already implementing to minimize impact on biodiversity is giving the positive results. So these are some of the examples. So company can present these types of studies under 10.1 category and report back to us. So here we have come to the end of our presentation of webinar. So we're also having our certified training on 11th and 12th April, which is for managing natural capital. So in this training, we are addressing three specific focus areas. The first is understanding the biodiversity, which is basics of biodiversity, and we'll present on which are the different policies are there, how the biodiversity is related to your operations, and all these things. Then the second major topic is relation of biodiversity with businesses, which is understanding the impacts and dependencies of biodiversity from the various types of businesses, understanding the concept of valuation, how it's helping in the decision making, and finally it's on the managing biodiversity, which is biodiversity indexing. uh, then how the green belt can develop green belt development, and how this green belt is help in the minimizing the impacts and dependency on the biodiversity. Then which are the benefits of supply chain management through the view of biodiversity, and then we'll also provide some details on the biodiversity integration in your company. So now we can go for a question answer session.